what I'd like to spend a few minutes talking to you about now is the two things really, and weave them together. One is the culture of the Carver Family Center for Macular Degeneration, and the other is a very unusual program in the United States that's called Project 3000. Somewhere in the packet that you were given today is a one-page document called the Culture Document. And if you look through that, you'll see some sentiments about things like the golden rule and taking your work seriously but not taking yourself too seriously and things like that, many of which you would think that you should have learned in second grade and had firmly entrenched in you by the fourth grade. But it turns out that in medical research, these attributes of sharing and thinking about the larger picture are not as common as we would like. And I've thought about that over my career, about why that is, and you might think about it too. How do we talk about scientists? We talk about winning the Nobel Prize. We talk about being the first and the biggest and things like that. And some of those things are okay, and certainly the drive to achieve something for the first time ever is sometimes a laudable goal. But you know, when you're facing something like a disease that affects 1 in 3 people, something that people have been grappling with for 100 years, the likelihood that one person, no matter how brilliant, is going to have some flash of insight and solve that is simply zero. It's simply zero. So this is a lot more of a problem like we need to deliver water to the entire Southwest United States. And somebody goes and finds a perfect little spot in a river and says, you know, if we just figure out how to put 3.09 trillion cubic meters of cement here, that would be Hoover Dam, then we could deliver water and electricity to the whole southwestern United States. And that isn't one guy or one lady's going to do that. You have to have all manner of people who know their craft. They have to agree upon a plan, and they have to bring cement to that location day after day after day in a precise order to achieve that outcome. Another example might be the space program, which growing up as I did in the 50s and 60s, that was the coolest thing around. That's what made us all want to be scientists, was the idea of going to the moon. But you remember how that went? It was in 1960 or 1961. None of the US rockets would go 20 feet off the pad without blowing up. The Russians had launched Sputnik, and it was up there beeping along. And President Kennedy said, and before this decade is out, we're going to take a man to the moon and bring him home safely again. And it captured everybody's imagination. But that wasn't one person that did that. They had a propulsion team, and they had a metals team, and they had a computational team, and the astronauts were all learning how to hold their breath for 3.5 days. And they had to do all that thing, and they had to all do it perfectly and in a coordinated way. So as we embarked upon this Carver Center for Macular Degeneration some years ago, we embraced that idea, the idea of competing against blindness instead of competing against each other. And the idea of going and finding somebody in another department or in another college or actually in another university to work with in a horizontal way to just cure the disease. And then whether we are listed as 17th author on the paper or aren't listed on the paper at all, it doesn't matter if at the end of the day, 1 in 3 people aren't threatened with blindness. And so that's what this culture document is really all about. Well, the amazing thing is that this is an incredibly resonant message. So when Derek Lee, a couple of years ago, learned that his daughter had a very serious disease that was threatening her vision, and came here to be seen at the University of Iowa. I introduced him to the owner of the Boston Celtics, whose child was born blind, because this man, the owner of the Celtics, had lived through the experience of having his child have this very rare blinding disease in the public eye, in which he was being asked all the time about his child and is this affecting your ability to do your job and all these kinds of things, and that's what Derek was facing, and so I connected the two of them. And they talked, helped each other, through this thing. But then as they did that, they said, how can we make a difference for this disease, not just for our children, but for everybody? Derek turned to me and he told me something about some of the testing he had undergone and how hard that had been for his daughter. And he said, I don't want any other family to ever experience that thing. What can we do to help? And so we had at the time developed a test, a genetic test, that had about a 70% chance of finding the specific disease-causing mutation for the disease that these two families were faced with. And we were ready to deploy it on a scale of the entire United States. We estimate that there are about 3,000 people in the United States with this disease. And what we wanted to do was go find all 3,000 of those people and give them this test so that we could diagnose all of these people and get them toward one of these clinical trials of gene replacement.